Chapter 12. Red Kayak. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Mrs. D'Angelo hadn't sent me that email the next day, because I was on a downward spiral, no question, and that email changed everything. Brady, I'm so sorry I didn't thank you earlier for the lasagna and the flowers. I appreciated it so much. It's been difficult, and I never even thanked you for what you did. It is so generous of you to offer to help. I do need someone to help with the yard. Would you like a summer job? Signed, Mrs. D'Angelo. It was never my intention to get a summer job out of Mrs. D'Angelo, but I went over there on Saturday to talk about it. Mom dropped me off. She'd made some cranberry orange muffins that morning, so I brought a paper plate with 6 of them covered in plastic wrap. When I rang the doorbell and watched my mother drive off, I didn't even think about being on that porch a few days ago with the lasagna dinner. Instead, I stood there recalling the very first time we'd come as a family, the new neighbors, to the D'Angelos for dinner. This would have been during the holidays, 5 months earlier, because I remembered the porch banisters all decorated with pine boughs and an enormous sweet-smelling bayberry wreath that hung on the front door. Dad hadn't been too keen on the dinner idea because, for starters, he's suspicious of all these rich new people moving onto the shore, buying up our farmland, rip-wrapping the waterfront, and building their mansions with 3-car garages. Plus, he hates getting fancy. He kept muttering, I'm not even going to know which darn fork to use. But Dad didn't have any trouble with his forks that night, and he had everybody hooked and laughing at his stories about the good old days. Mr. D'Angelo didn't believe Dad when he told him that the underwater grasses were so thick when Dad was a boy he once dragged a box spring through the creek to clear the channel for his boat. And Mrs. D'Angelo seemed delighted with all of us as she swung her head back and forth, talking to Mom and me across the table and tending to Ben, who sat beside her in his booster seat, smashing peas and potatoes into his face and making one heck of a mess. Mom was pretty that night. With her sparkling earrings and her long sandy-colored hair twisted up on her head, we kept catching each other's eyes, chuckling over the things Ben said, such as, This cabot's a torpedo! Watch! As he made the vegetable plow through a path of gravy on his plate before targeting his mouth. After dessert, I picked up every morsel of that delicious key lime pie with my forked tines. I said to Ben, Hey, how about you show me that new hamster you got for Christmas? Oh, Ben, did you hear that? Brady wants to see Tiny Tim, Mrs. D'Angelo exclaimed. I could tell she was very appreciative. While she lifted Ben out of his booster seat, Mr. D'Angelo poured more wine for the adults, and I caught a grateful look from my parents as well. Ben's hamster was cute and had an incredible setup with a big cage and all kinds of plastic tubes and hideouts. Plus, he had an exercise wheel and a glow ball he could run inside. You've got to be kidding me, I said when Ben explained how the glow ball rolled around on the floor. Fearless, Ben scooped up the hamster with one hand, plopped him inside that ball, and snapped the little door closed. Then he ran to the light switch and turned out the lights so we could sit cross-legged on Ben's bed that looked like a race car and watch the ball glow and roll around the bedroom floor. It was surreal, but I'll tell you, I about died laughing. I had time to think back on all this because it was taking Mrs. D'Angelo an age to answer the door. Suddenly, though, I heard footsteps and the sound of a lock being turned from the inside. Brady, Mrs. D'Angelo said, opening the door. I hoped it wasn't rude the way I dropped my mouth, but I almost didn't recognize her. She looked so bad. Like a bedraggled ghost, you would say. Her skin was pale as chalk and her eyes puffy with big dark bags underneath. Even her hair, usually so thick and curly, was pulled back severely, held at the nape of her neck with a cloth scrunchie like a lot of the girls wear at school. Come in, she said, stepping back. I brushed off my baseball cap as I entered. She smiled a little when she took the muffins. Since she was dressed in sweatpants and an oversized flannel shirt, I thought maybe we'd go straight to the yard to start working, but she led me through the house to the kitchen. The D'Angelo's kitchen is twice the size of our living room, with its own fireplace and glass doors that open onto a patio. There's a spectacular view overlooking the creek. I glanced at it. You can't help it, but mostly I was keeping an eye on Mrs. D'Angelo, hoping she wouldn't get too sad or anything. I do want to thank you, she said. I knew she didn't mean the muffins. It was no trouble, I replied, immediately thinking of how stupid that sounded. I did my best, Mrs. D'Angelo. I'm sure you did, Brady. She sat and looked out the window. Unzipping my jacket, I sat down too, but it was awkward. I didn't feel as though I had said enough or the right thing, and you could feel her sorrow. It filled every molecule of air in that room. But man, I didn't know what to say. Somehow we laid out a plan for me to coming over to take care of the yard, and even though I told her I just wanted to help, she insisted on paying me. So I agreed. I agreed with everything she said because I didn't want to argue with her. That afternoon, I began work by cutting the lawn, which took me about 4 hours with the riding lawnmower. When I was finished, Mrs. D'Angelo fed me lunch, a sandwich, chips, and lemonade on her patio. Then she asked me if I would take Ben's hamster. Take him? You mean keep him? I asked. She nodded quickly, and I could see her eyes filling up. Sure, oh, it's fine, I assured her, realizing how Tiny Tim must be a constant reminder of Ben. I'll take him right now if you want. We strode silently, the two of us, through the house to Ben's room upstairs. The door was closed, and we stopped outside of it. I can't go in, Brady, but here, she thrust some money into my hands for food and things that he needs. I looked at the money, a thick wad of folded bills. Please, she repeated. I'll get my car and I'll meet you out front, okay? She turned and moved quickly down the stairs. I heard her clogs clomp across the marble foyer, then the front door open and close. Only then did I stuff the money into my pocket and turn the doorknob to enter Ben's room. It was just as I remembered it from when I babysat several weeks ago. There were Legos all over the place, including the part of the castle that we had built. A wooden train was set up. The car bed was neatly made with a stuffed dinosaur leaning against the pillow, which was in the shape of a tire. Pajamas were laid out on the bed, and a pair of fuzzy duck slippers sat waiting at the door. I felt extremely sad being in that room. I could understand why Mrs. D'Angelo did not want to go in. The hamster was beginning to smell, too. Only then did I wonder what my mother was going to say when I walked in with a hamster, a rodent. At home, I set the hamster cage on the newspaper-covered card table in my room. Tilly was delighted to have Tiny Tim with us, and my mom didn't care, it just turned out. Just keep it clean, she warned. But the first night the hamster made so much noise running around in his wheel that I had to move him down to the basement. How could Ben stand all that racket? I wondered. As it was, I still had trouble sleeping. I threw myself into working for Mrs. D'Angelo. After school, Saturdays, sometimes when I arrived on the weekend, she wasn't even out of bed. She hid a key in the garage so I could get into the house to use the bathroom or get a drink, and one morning, when I let myself in, I heard her upstairs throwing up. I worried she was making herself sick from being so depressed and so alone. Her mother, her sister, a friend, they'd all come and gone, but I was afraid to talk to her, so I just kept myself busy. And boy, there was plenty to do at the D'Angelo's place. Every other week I mowed the lawn and trimmed, which took all day. Then I mulched the gardens, weeded, planted, and watered everything. She had a whole truckload of stuff delivered. Impatiens, marigolds, geraniums, miniature roses. She showed me where she wanted everything planted, and the day she stood there pointing around at her garden was the first time she seemed just a little bit better. I guess I got caught up in the moment. You get a lot of sun here. You ought to plant yourself a butterfly garden, like my mom, I suggested. A butterfly garden, she repeated like it was a real enchanting idea. She crossed her arms, thinking, well, I dug a hole for one of those rose bushes. We get a lot of butterflies, I said, angling the shovel. There are certain plants they like, then? Oh, are you kidding? I had to stop for a second to expound a little, because I knew a lot about butterflies. First off, they don't like red. They like yellow and purple, and blue the best. Really? Clusters too, I said, encouraged by her interest. You know, as opposed to like a single plant. And they need some flat rocks so they can warm up before they take off. Plus a low-lying source of water. You could put in a lily pad pond or just a bird bath if you don't want to go into the trouble. She glanced around the yard. How about by the pool? Perfect. Any place that gets a lot of sun. I grinned and went back to digging. How long has your mom had the butterfly garden? She asked. I had to stop and think. 6 years, I replied, dumping the earth beside the hole. Ever since my sister died. Boy, I knew the instant I said it that I shouldn't have, because it was made her think of Ben. And there it was, digging holes. Wearily, I looked up. Mrs. D'Angelo looked startled. You lost a sister, Brady? Yeah, I acknowledged with a sigh. When she was 5 months old, she put her hand up to her chest. It's okay now, I rushed to assure her, even though it wasn't really true. I mean, it was a long time ago, and the butterfly garden has helped. Her wide, mournful eyes had settled on me, and I could tell they weren't going anywhere until I explained a little better. My mom, she believes that the butterflies are like little spirits. Who knows? Maybe even my sisters, I said, shrugging because I'd never really been sure about that. Mrs. D'Angelo nodded. Would you excuse me, Brady? She said before rushing off. I kicked the shovel because I knew I'd stirred things up. I wondered if she'd want me back after that, but she did. She even started asking me what I liked for sandwiches and drinks, and at noon, she'd sit down with me to chit-chat for a while we ate. One day, we talked about butterflies again, and I told her about butterfly eyes. They can look forward and backward at the same time, I said. It's true because they have hundreds of separate lenses. It's like looking out from a bowl, a fisheye, panoramic view of the world. Her dark eyes sparkled. You don't believe me? Try sneaking up on a butterfly, I challenged her. Oh, I believe you. I have to say, it was terrific to see her smile again, even if she still did look pretty run down. Digger was still being a total jerk, avoiding me. But JT started talking to me while we were in school. We need to get together, he kept saying, but neither one of us picked up the phone. I was busy, and I figured he was too, working his butt off on that chicken farm after school. Plus, we had final exams coming up. It's funny, even though I come home exhausted every day that I work for Mrs. D'Angelo, I was getting some of my old energy back. Evenings, I threw the ball for Tilly, helped Dad repair some of his broken crab pots, and even offered to help my mother with the dishes one night when it wasn't my turn. Mrs. D'Angelo was curious about your garden, I told Mom as I plunged my hands into the soapy water. My mother was putting leftovers away. She is? Yeah, she's been reading up on it. Just today, she asked about your foundation shrubs, so I told her about the butterfly bush and that smaller one, the purple one. Lavender, Mom gently reminded me as she snapped the lid on the bowl of leftover coleslaw. Lots of different shrubs would work, though. Azaleas, rhododendrons, spice bush, wisteria vine. Mom, I told her about the butterfly bush and the lavender because they get a lot of butterflies. I didn't know all the other names. You do, though. Maybe you could go over there and give her some advice. Me? Mom put the bowl in the refrigerator and stood, closing the door with her back to me. Yeah, you, Mom. It might be nice. I mean, no one ever goes to see her. A couple of people from her church now and then, but they don't stay long. I rinsed a pot and set it back in the dish drainer. She turned around. Marcellus hasn't come back? No. She even told me one day he blames her for what happened. Mom winced. She did? Yeah, I guess she wanted me to know why he wasn't there. I feel sorry for her because she's so alone. She spends the first half of the day in bed, and then she sort of goes through the motions the rest of the day. Mom retrieved a basket from the table and put the leftover rolls in a Ziploc bag. The poor thing, she must be so depressed. I don't know about depressed, I said, scrubbing hard on the blackened skillet, but she sure is sick a lot. Almost every morning she throws up. Brady! Mom swung around to look at me. What? Is Mrs. D'Angelo pregnant? I stopped scrubbing. How would I know? Mom's eyes fitted sideways. She ran a hand back through her hair. I'm sorry, of course you wouldn't know, but those are pretty classic symptoms, morning nausea, fatigue. I didn't say anything. I just went back to cleaning that skillet. Well, is there something you can do for her? Mom persisted. That's what got me. I stopped scrubbing and turned around to confront my mother. I don't know what more I can do, but you know what? Maybe you could try and help her too. I mean, gee whiz, you're a mother. You lost a kid. You have things to say to her that I can't. Never had I spoken to my mother like that before. Never. I let my breath out and stared at the faucets, then rested my wrists on the edge of the sink, bracing myself for Mom's angry reaction. But it never came. You're right, she said quietly. She wiped her hands on a dish towel. I should go see her. She untied her apron, folded it, and set it on the counter. I should go see her right now. And I watched her go across the kitchen and out the door. I don't know what Mom said, but I do know this. A few days later, Mrs. D'Angelo had one fine butterfly garden out there by her pool. I know because I planted it. She had a butterfly bush and yellow sunflowers, cosmos daisies, daylilies, 2 bird baths full of water. I even planted some milkweed, violets, and wispy saltgrass for the caterpillars, and when butterflies are in the larval stage. Then I bordered with dozens of miniature marigolds. Not that I was keeping track, but it had been 6 weeks since Ben died, and I was beginning to feel things shift just a little bit for the better. At the end of May, the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, I planned on working for a few hours for Mrs. D'Angelo. Then I was going to knock off early and go to a picnic at my Uncle Henry's. Get this, I was even thinking of asking JT to come with us. Memorial Day weekend. I'll never forget it, because just when things started to come back together, they came undone in a big way. So that is chapter 12. We'll read chapter 13 in person.